Prime Minister Modi there just finishing his address to the joint session of the US Congress. At several points during that speech, which went on for nearly 45 minutes, the Prime Minister got a standing ovation from the House. You can see there that he's now going to go across and greet many congressmen and women who've been there to listen to him. A number of important points made during the course of that speech that has covered the entire range of the India-US relationship. He invoked Prime Minister Vajpayee more than once during that speech, has talked about where the relationship stands today and certainly the issues that concern India the most at this point, particularly the issue of terrorism, where he had some very strong words as well. Joining us on the program tonight, we have Professor Stephen Cohen from the Brookings Institution, who will be joining us shortly from Washington. Sanjay Baru, author, columnist and former advisor to Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, who's been in the thick of diplomacy with the US himself in the past. Former diplomat Rajiv Dogra here in the studio with us. We also have joining us tonight Shekhar Gupta, and Seema Sirohi is joining us tonight from Washington DC. But let me ask Sanjay Baru first, your thoughts on the Prime Minister's speech and what were the key things that you took away from it tonight?
So it was a well-written speech. It was lively.
It was funny.
Made congressmen laugh. There were light-hearted moments which added color to the speech. It focused on all the key aspects of our relationship: fight against terrorism, defense cooperation, agriculture, the role of US in India's green revolution, space, NRIs, etc., etc. So it pressed all the right buttons. It did not make any major statement about next steps. I guess the US is in election mode. We don't know who the next US president would be, so it might be premature to talk about the future. But I think it was, first of all, it was a very entertaining speech. There were more than 40 ovations, almost 40 ovations. I remember.
You counted?
I counted because for Manmohan Singh in 2005 July, there were 33 ovations.
So he got more.
It was a 30-minute speech which went on for over 40 minutes because there were 33 interruptions. So therefore, I was interested in counting. I actually counted. Once it crossed 40, I stopped counting.
Well, that's very interesting observation, Mr. Dogra. Is that the similar takeaway that you had from, as Sanjay Baru has, that he touched on everything, that he addressed all the key issues that the two countries face today?
Well, there are three things. First, the style and the substance. I think both the style was confident. It was not appealing to US to understand India's problems. It was a partner speaking to another partner. And I think the best touch was when he came to Afghanistan.
Yeah.
There, he showed a practical example of hard power of US and soft power of India, doing things on ground which are of benefit to the people. And then he went on to say that this can be multiplied in other areas also. Of course, he lobbed another tangential at Pakistan for what it is doing in Afghanistan. But on the whole, it was a speech of confidence. He brought in the old, and then he brought in very nice touch about yoga.
Yeah.
That old with modern. So I think
also, I thought that was funny what he said about the bipartisanship of the US Congress and how
I thought that was beautiful. That
yeah.
was very well timed, perfect timing and delivery. But there's another thing which struck me, that sometimes the Congress the hall is not filled with actual congressmen and senators. Sometimes they have to fill it in with people from outside. This time it was a genuine hall full of senators and congressmen, and the applause was genuine in terms of appreciation. Applause was not prompted by the speaker and the vice president.
I think you could see that in the fact that there were as many as 40 ovations. I have to go and count now because I'm very curious to see if that's what the number is. But let me go across to Professor Stephen Cohen in Washington DC. Professor Cohen, would you say that this was a speech that was a hit in the US Congress tonight?
Yes, I think it was, and I wouldn't worry too much about congressmen not being there. In fact, Congress is actually filled because they've just returned from a recess, so there were a lot of congressmen there. But I think what was not said publicly is probably as important as what was said publicly, and that is, as one speaker referred to, the question of Pakistan, of terrorism and so forth. And what I'm afraid of is that the US and India are getting into a relationship that's based on a lot of cliches. And I think it would be dangerous if either the United States or the Indians took the cliches too seriously.
And what cliches would those be, if you could elaborate on that? What do you think the dangers are?
Well, it began with a classic one, natural ally. I'm not sure what that means, and I'm not sure what an unnatural ally is. And I think net defense provider is another one. There's a whole range of them, which are really, these are words that diplomats invent to avoid dealing with hard facts. And sometimes it's important to avoid hard facts because there may be important differences between countries. But I think the policymakers and the informed publics in both countries should be aware that there's a lot of jargon building going on. But it was a very successful speech. It appealed to our interest, appealed to Indian interests. So I think it was very well managed.
I think that's very interesting what you said. If I could press you on what you mean, about bureaucrats who avoid the hard facts, because we've seen generally positive coverage of this visit in the last 48 hours. But I think when you do look at some of the finer print, for instance, on the climate issue, even on the Westinghouse reactors, it's not exactly moved in the way that it could have, has it?
Well, I think our expectations for rapid and visible progress are exaggerated in a sense. These are two major countries. All the cliches involved with the U.S. and India, and they're moving slowly towards parallel policies. I wouldn't say they're following the same policy, but the policies overlap in a number of areas. And my view is that they're moving towards an overlap of policy with regard to Pakistan, which is a major unfulfilled strategic objective for India and for the United States. It says both of us have to come up with a Pakistan policy that works.
Well, I want to get into some more specifics in his speech, Shekhar Gupta, and one of the things he said actually pretty high up in the speech was that for my government, the Constitution is its real holy book, and in that holy book, freedom of faith, speech and franchise, equality of all citizens are enshrined as fundamental rights. How important is that statement in particular when you've also had congressmen, even in recent weeks, questioning India on human rights, questioning India on religious freedom, or even on the crackdown on NGOs? Do you feel that this statement has set that to rest?
Well, this is frankly motherhood and apple pie. Any Indian Prime Minister would pay compliments to his constitution, and any Indian Prime Minister is sworn to protect and preserve the constitution. So I don't see that. I see that as a standard statement that an Indian Prime Minister would make. We should not put extra emphasis on it just because a BJP Prime Minister is making that statement. Any Prime Minister will make that statement. If Donald Trump becomes the President of America, he will make some similar statement about US Constitution and the way of life. To me, the most important...
Except that you have had US congressmen raising issues with regard to India in recent weeks.
That's a triviality, I'm sorry to say that. That's a triviality. For me, the big takeaway in the speech is an expression he used, and I think this expression will endure now for a long time. This is, he said, India and America have now overcome hesitations of history.
And he invoked Vajpayee there.
Yes, when Bill Clinton came to India, he talked about the lost decades in our relationship. Obama also talked about the lost decades in our relationship. While the Cold War was on, we were natural adversaries. Our societies were natural allies, but our countries were strategically natural adversaries. Since the end of the Cold War, Indian leaders have tried to correct India's position in the world, particularly vis-a-vis the US. But all the rest until now had this hesitation, hesitation of history, you can call it, or you can call it strategic hesitation. I think I didn't hear Dr. Manmohan Singh say it will be in America's strategic interest if India is prosperous and strong. He said it will be in America's interest. No, he avoided using the word strategic. Sanjay, you wrote this speech. You wrote this speech. But this even Nehru could have said. Right? A strong
so you're
and
saying he's
prosperous
taken
India.
It to the next level?
Because he has a certain direct style. So he is dropping that hesitation because he doesn't carry the burden of history.
Has a quick intervention.
I think one shouldn't exaggerate the difference. I do sincerely believe that Prime Minister Narendra Modi has taken the relationship built by his two predecessors, Mr. Vajpayee and Dr. Manmohan Singh, forward. I do not think he has taken it to a new level. I think what has happened is that the relationship across the board, economic, people to people, business to business, has actually moved forward. But the differentiator would come. The differentiator would come if, in fact, we were to have a stronger defense relationship. I think we are one step away from that.
We're close
when
to
that happens, That would be the differentiator. Otherwise, in its essence, the relationship today is at the same level of strategic engagement that Dr. Manmohan Singh pursued as Prime Minister.
Seema Sirohi, how is the speech being received there today, and the visit as a whole in the US? Of course, normally the visits of Indian Prime Ministers don't get the kind of media coverage that the visits of US presidents do here. But do you see at least credit being given to Narendra Modi and President Obama for breathing life back into this relationship at a time when it had kind of become a little problematic as well? There were far more irritants than there were issues of convergence.
Absolutely. I think there's acknowledgement across the board in Washington that Prime Minister Modi has re-energized the relationship. We all know that towards the end of the UPA government, things had plateaued. Plus, we had very difficult sort of diplomatic incidents to tackle. Modi has done away with that. And I would argue that he's taken the relationship forward, gave the defense cooperation bit that he didn't see in the last. For example, he said today that the constraints of the past are behind us. And if you look at the joint statement issued yesterday, there are many things that you could argue are at one level incremental, but I think shouldn't take away credit from a government that has felt a little more free to come out in the open with the United States.
Okay, I think, that's an important point actually, and Sanjay Baru was making that point, Mr. Dogra, on defense in particular. To that extent, do you think that this was the right time to have actually gone through with the defense logistics agreement? Would that have just been a big step that would symbolize a big step forward in the relationship? It didn't happen.
Well, I think what did happen was a very strong statement on defense relationship, a commitment by USA that India would have a special category in terms of defense purchases, which will not go through the bureaucratic processes that it has been subjected to so far. Equally important is on the cyber issue, where USA is feeling the pinch of some countries stealing its data, and where there is also a real threat of US, India, some other countries getting their infrastructure damaged due to cyber threat from some countries or the other. These three elements, defense, cyber and terror, they have come out very clearly in the statement. Logistics arrangement, for right reasons or wrong reasons, is progressing slowly. If you ask me, I think the longer it takes, the better it is, because then we'll be aware of what we are going in for and to what extent we should go in for. But the intent on these three elements is very clear, as is the fact that it is no longer India which is looking for American support, but America is also looking for Indian support after what happened to their aircraft over South China Sea yesterday.
But Professor Cohen, would you agree to that? Would you agree that today it's about the United States needing India in this region as much as it is about India needing the US?
Well, I don't know if you could measure the term as much as. That's a very general term, but I think it's important, as somebody just said, that the longer this takes, the better it'll be, because there's a lot of fixing that has to be done within the American bureaucracy and also within the Indian bureaucracy in terms of the defense relationship. These are two countries that are not used to working with each other and still very suspicious of each other at the working level. But I think over time that could change. I think the real question will be if there's a crisis somewheres where the defense agreement has to be invoked by the United States or by India, what do we do? And especially since we will have a new president who may not have the assumptions of the current president about India. So I think that a crisis could force the hand of both countries in the future, and not in the not too distant future. It could be forced either by India or by Pakistan or by China for that matter. Or there could be another Khobragade incident that rose up. They could flame opinion, at least on the Indian side. So I think we hope it's not a policy, but we all hope it won't happen either. But I think the relationship is going about as well as it could go. I remember when I first went into it 50 years ago, it was very hostile relationship. and that's moderated. I think it's moderated in good ways. And I will still argue, as I did argue in a couple of books of mine, that India's survival and thriving is a vital American interest. That's something we should be supporting as a matter of high policy.
Sanjay Baru, an interesting point someone raised earlier tonight was how important actually it is for the Prime Minister to have made this address, that this was perhaps the most important part of the speech, because in the US increasingly you see you have a president, but you also have a House of Representatives and a Senate that may or may not be from the same party, and therefore it's important to reach out, especially on the issue of terrorism. Do you think that that was a particularly strong statement that he made? He also seemed to be making a reference to the F-16 issue in a very indirect way, where he's saying refusing to reward them is the first step towards holding them accountable for their actions. How important was this speech in that sense, and on the messaging of terrorism to the Congress?
Well, I think he thanked the Congress for taking a tough line, and that is true. The US Congress has taken a tough line on F-16s, on Pakistan, on terrorism, and so he actually used this opportunity to thank them. I think the timing is important because the US is going in for an election, and it's an election that's going to be closely fought. The US is politically very divided. All his jokes about the Indian Parliament and the US Congress being bipartisan, etc., were all focused on this fact that they are as divided internally as in many ways we are internally, and therefore I think the Prime Minister decided that this is a good time to reach out both to the Republicans and to the Democrats, because it will take another 5-6 months before a new administration settles down in the US. In fact, more than 6 months before a new administration settles. So this is the election
End
time.
of January.
So I think this was the right time to go to the US Congress
and get the messaging
make
across.
Address both political parties.
And therefore, in last comments tonight, Shekhar, who's better for India, a President Trump or a President Clinton?
I think,
what would a President Trump mean? No one quite knows.
None of us has a vote in America, so leave it to the wisdom of American voters. But what I would like to say is that
that's a very diplomatic statement.
Very
diplomatic statement.
Well, that's a statement of fact. But the fact is that we should not underestimate the power of 283. The difference between this Prime Minister, there is a difference of personality, style, etc. But the big difference is that a Prime Minister with 283 MPs behind him, a clear majority, speaks for India with a completely different authority than a Prime Minister with 220 odd, or a Prime Minister with 140 odd, or a Prime Minister with 190 odd. So it's the first Indian Prime Minister with a full majority, and that gets not just him, but India a very different kind of hearing. And I think
so. You believe there will be continuity largely in foreign policy, regardless.
Well,
I think
that's the proudest thing about what's happened. The thing that you can feel the most proud about. This transition in India's foreign policy is like a relay race. In relay race, there are 4 runners. One hands over the baton to the other, since Mr. Modi used the word baton for an orchestra conductor. So Vajpayee gave it to Manmohan Singh 1. Manmohan Singh 1 gave it to Manmohan Singh 2, who nearly fumbled and dropped it. And Narendra Modi is the new runner who's picked it up and started running with much greater vigor.
All right.
Because it was Mr. Antony and Sonia Gandhi and the rest who ruined this policy and slowed this in UPA
Also, to be fair, the last word, I mean, it's not just that Dr. Manmohan Singh erred in the second term in terms of the relationship.
Fumbled, I didn't say
fumbled. But the President Obama too was not focused on India in his first term.
Exactly.
I mean, that period between 2009 and 2012, we
was a
made
very
mistakes,
difficult
they made
period.
But
mistakes.
Sanjay, at the same time, for our government to become so weak that the incident about an maid getting illegal treatment from one of our diplomats who then
I
had
will
to
let
be
you
fired,
argue separately about
right?
Devyani Khobragade another
but
day.
It tells you how seriously we
But
took
thank you
ourselves.
very much. Thank you very much to all of you for
Democracy.
joining us. We'll continue this discussion, I think, off camera for now. But do keep watching, because we have an interview with Raghuram Rajan coming up next. See you later.